everyone. It definitely is a warm welcome back to the Doctor Will See You Now. As you can tell, I think from both our windows, here we are. It's June 2023, if you're watching this out of time. And yeah, the heat is rising. And I think, again, previously I spoke to an author, the heat was beginning and the book was a ball of heat. I think we could say the same of the book we're going to talk about today, but maybe a more refined ball of heat. But we shall see, we shall see. Anyway, hope you're all well. Viewers, listeners, thank you for joining us. We're into the world of psychological thrillers today, and my guest, Katherine Faulkner. Katherine, lovely to see you. Great to meet you. How are you?
I'm really well, although a little hot. But thank you very much for having me. It's great to be here.
It's so good. I'm always thrilled when I get the chance. I'm so grateful to publishers and agents where I get a chance to meet an author I've not met before, and I don't know. It's really interesting. I think it's going to sound weird, but it's a little bit like gardening. That every flower and every plant is different. Regardless of they're doing the flowering planty thing. I think it's the same thing of authors. They are each one is unique, even though the craft and the idea is there. So again, as I say, it's so lovely to meet you. And I'd like to say, well, it was wonderful to read the book, but oh so beautifully disturbing. Um, I think that sense of appearances can be deceptive, and all is not well in paradise. Yeah, and beautifully done. But before we get into talking about The Other Mothers, published by Raven Books, June 2023, I wonder if you, because this is your second book after Greenwich Park, which I'll touch on a little bit later, but if you would talk to us about your road to this point in time, because you studied history at Cambridge, and here you are now, an author, thrillers, crime fiction. There seems to be a bit of a gap in between. Fill us in on that gap.
Okay. Sure. Well, I've always loved stories. That's been my thing, even as a young child, I read early and I wanted to read everything, and I liked to write my own stories. I think in about year three, I started really writing my own stories. And I remember I had a teacher that year who was really encouraged me, and I used to staple them together and make them into real books because I loved that. And I remember that teacher telling my parents that she actually took my stories home to read to her own kids.
Wow.
And that really, that stuck with me. And I remember thinking, oh, they must be good then, if Miss Nichols likes them. I just always have written stories. And then as you get older, I think it's really sad in our education system, you kind of creative writing kind of goes away as a thing, and kids don't get encouraged to do it anymore, really, past about year 7. So I kind of got that message that it wasn't something that I could do as a serious job. And so I looked for other things, I was interested in other things too. I was interested in the world. I'm interested in people, interested in the past, in the stories of the past, particularly. And that's what sparked my interest in history. And so that's why I ended up studying it, I really love being immersed in learning about different times in history and the past. And so it kind of all feeds into the same interest, I suppose, but in a different way.
Could I just ask you something about the history, because I've been interviewing a number of authors recently. I don't know how it happens. They seem to all like historical crime fiction. But I wondered for yourself that your time at university, did you have a favorite historical period?
Yeah, I was really interested in the Victorian era, but I was also interested in non-European history. I
Mm,
took a big interest in the British Empire and colonialism, and there's been a big movement to change the way we think about all of that since I was at university,
mm,
which is amazing, I think. But I kind of felt like I was only really scratching the surface of it. But I had traveled during my year between school and university to Africa and Asia, and I was really grappling with some big questions about
Yes, yeah.
what had happened in those places and our connection with them, which seemed to me to be so uneasy and strange.
Yes.
And I was just fascinated by all of that stuff. And I don't know if I really got any answers from my degree, but I tried, and I did a dissertation on the nationalist movements in Tanzania, which is, and Tanganyika as it was then, which is kind of really niche, but that's where I had traveled, and I really wanted to understand a bit more about that country and what had happened and our contact with it, and how our contact with Tanzania and Tanganyika and Zanzibar as it was then had shaped that country's history. So I was looking for answers about those questions and the past. And yeah, I mean, I'm still fascinated by history. I love historical fiction, though, seems to me to be something very, it feels like to me a really big, hard mountain to climb in terms of doing it really, really well. And the people who do it really well are so extraordinary. But to me, I think for some, and for them, obviously, their interest in history and their writing stories kind of part of their brain obviously just marry up really nicely. But for me, that's never been quite how my brain works.
Yeah, yeah.
I've always felt there's a separation for me between fiction and non-fiction, and for me the fictional ideas and inspiration that I get really comes from my own lived experience,
Mm-hmm.
things that
Yeah,
are inside my own brain,
you've
rather than
yeah,
things.
you've just perfectly, sort of like confirmed what I was saying at the beginning, that because I can see, your passion for what you studied at university is so clear when you talk about it. But, so I was going to suggest, well, given that passion and the amazing way that you write, but you answered my question on that as well, that no, for you, these are different, they're different things, and they
They're
don't
different,
come
yeah,
together.
they're just different parts
Yeah,
of my brain. And I do
yeah.
find it fascinating, the people who write historical fiction, because those parts of their brain obviously do come together, but for me, they don't really. But I also kind of had this experience at the end of school which I think a lot of people have, where you go to your careers advisor and you sort of say, well, and they say, well, what do you want to do? What job are you going to do? And you got to think, oh God. And for me, the answer has always been, well, I'd love to write books, but then, they think, well, no, give another answer, please, because that's not a realistic career. So you have to think of something else. And I think what's really hopeless about those conversations is that nobody talks about all the amazing creative industries we have in this country, media, arts, publishing. I mean, publishing books.
Yeah.
Even if you're not going to write books, if you love books,
You
we have
can
this
be with
huge,
them. Yeah.
vibrant publishing industry, and you're part of it. Festivals, events, everything. So, podcasting. There's just so much, and
Yes.
they've got not a clue about that. Or, I mean, maybe they have more of a clue now, but they certainly didn't in those days. So they just kind of said, "Well, I can see here you've got English and history." A levels, and you're predicted, and French, and you're predicted good grades. So maybe you could be a lawyer. That was there. And I just thought, oh, wow, I just felt depressed. I just thought, I'm not a lawyer. I'm just not a lawyer sort of person.
Yeah.
I'm somebody who, anyway, I wanted to write and I wanted to find out about stories. And it ended up leading me to the idea of being a journalist. And after my history degree, when I was at university, I liked the idea of being a journalist, and I thought, well, if I could, if I can't write stories, it's kind of the next best thing. And also, I was really interested in politics and all of those things as well. So and I did some student journalism at university, and I loved that, and I loved the collaborative nature of it, and the kind of the sort of spiky nature of it, and being a bit outside the establishment. That's always been my kind of jam, rather than being a corporate lawyer.
Love it. Love it.
So it suited me, and so I did a postgraduate diploma in journalism after I finished my history degree, and then I spent over 10 years as a journalist, working for national newspapers. I did investigative work. I was an undercover journalist.
And you might not wish to say it, but I think it's fine for me to say it, that you were actually you were given the Cudlip Award for public interest journalism.
Yeah.
Yeah. So again, I think there's that interest in the aspect of investigation, getting to
Yeah.
the root of things. So I've never heard of this award. So could you speak to us about that?
Yeah, it's in memory of a great journalist called Hugh Cudlip, and it's an award for usually investigative journalism that's in the public interest. So, in other words, the kind of journalism that brings something to light that is in, that the public needs to know about and that shouldn't be hidden. And I got it for an investigation that I did into the way that really big major charities, many of whom get government funding, so big, we're talking about like Oxfam, Red Cross,
Mm-hmm.
Macmillan, a number of others, were using these call centers, which were using really uh, inappropriate techniques to get money off people, basically, including elderly and vulnerable people and people with dementia. Even when people clearly were confused or having memory problems on the phone, you were encouraged to keep hammering them for more money, and it was incredibly unpleasant. So I went undercover in this call center, posed as an operative of these phones, recorded a lot of evidential footage, and then we published our investigation. As a result, those call centers were shut down. There was a big investigation into charity fundraising in the UK. There was actually a big parliamentary session on it, and they came up with a complete overhaul of there was a complete overhaul of
Mm-hmm.
fundraising practices basically in the UK charity industry. So yeah, that is something I'm really proud of.
Mm. And we will again, the idea of the journalist and the character that you've created in the other mothers. I wonder how much of you as the journalist is in there. Anyway, so there we are. Successful journalist, but when did the moment come for you to say, I write fact, I bring things to light, but that person, that little girl who used to create stories, it's bubbling there and wants to come out again.
Yeah, it's funny. You put it exactly right that there was this kind of little girl who'd written stories who'd kind of been forgotten about. And actually, really interestingly, it was having a daughter of my own that
Mm,
brought her back. Um, and I guess I was turning 30. I'd been in journalism since school
mhm,
and I loved it. But I decided I was having my first baby, and I took and I was kind of relieved to be having a baby because
mhm.
I didn't know how hard it would be, obviously. I was kind of thinking of it as a break. My career had been, I know, it's awful, isn't it?
Okay.
I was thinking, oh, a year maternity leave, that'll be nice, relaxing. And my career had been really full on. Because I hadn't just done as well as the investigative stuff, I'd done news editing, which was very intense. I'd done features editing. I was working very long hours, and I think I think I knew I needed space in my brain to think about, is there another thing that I want to do with my life? And I also wanted to have a child. So I had my daughter, and I think it was just serendipity. A few things happened at once. The first thing was that I had this idea for Greenwich Park that just wouldn't go away. And I'd always, even in my 20s when I was working as a journalist, I was like secretly writing things, but I never showed them to anyone. Um,
Mhm.
and I didn't think any of them were ever really any good. But then I had the idea for Greenwich Park, and I thought I had this idea already before I started my antenatal classes of what happens if you can't unmake a friendship. So what happens if you make friends with someone and then you want to back out of that relationship and you can't make the person go away? Because it always occurred to me that the rules
Mm.
are quite clear in romantic relationships. You can break up with somebody and that's it. They have to go away. That's the rule. But it's not so clear with friendships, particularly between women.
Yes.
Those things
Yeah.
are complex, and the dynamics are very fraught sometimes, and they can be very complicated. And I find all that fascinating. So I had that idea already. And then when I went to my first antenatal class, I literally had a bit of a light bulb moment of, oh my God, this is the moment where these two characters are going to meet, because it's so strange, so intense. It's a sort of universal experience for parents, but it's also a very odd experience by any
Yes.
standards, because you're forced into this intimacy with total strangers in this weird room with this woman who's talking to you about what's going to happen to your vagina. And it's just
Yeah.
total madness. So I thought this is perfect. And I started writing it. And then And then my baby was born, and then I had no sleep, and then I couldn't do much for a while. But then when she started to sleep a bit in the day, as very small babies do, and you start to get your brain back a little bit together, I found that I wanted to write it, and I was taking my laptop out in the bottom of the pram, and then when she would fall asleep, I'd kind of duck into a coffee
Yeah.
shop and try and write a little bit. And then a few months in, when she was maybe 4 months old, I said to my husband, I want to write this book, and I feel like now's the time to do it. And and I actually had started to think about her. All your life changes and you're thinking about this baby. And I was thinking about, she's my daughter and I've got all this responsibility, and what am I going to teach her, and what am I going to show her, and what's she going to learn from me? And you think about all that in this like really intense way. And one of the things that I thought was, well, when I was a little girl, I wanted to write stories, and I didn't want to say to her one day, oh, well, I always wanted to write stories, but I never did anything about
Yeah.
it. Never
Yeah. Yeah.
found time. I just ended up forgetting about my dreams and just going along my merry way. I thought, no, who cares
I
what
love that.
if I fail? I'm just going to do it. And I need to
Yeah.
be able to say to her, look, mummy tried. And I thought, these days, even if I have to just print it off myself, self-publish it, if I make a book, I can still show it to her and say, look, I
Yes.
write a book and I wrote one. And you can do it too, and that was important to me, so
Yeah.
to be able to do that. So it was a bit of that, and it was a bit of having a bit more time and perspective on my life from kind of having this major life reset. And also partly just having this good idea that which felt different to me. And the other thing that I needed, just because the kind of person that I am, though, is a bit of structure. So
Mhm.
I'd been looking into courses, and I ended up doing the Faber course, as I mentioned to you
Great.
before. Of
Yeah.
course, Bloomsbury Square, which is your favourite bit of London, is beautiful. Those big trees in the square that give you hay fever
Mm.
terribly at this time of year. But apart from that, and that was lovely because I started doing that when my baby was 6 months old. It was my first thing where I was away from her, but I would leave her with my husband.
Mm.
He would just have to get on with the bottle feeding, and I would just go away for 2 hours, probably 4 hours sometimes, because we used to go to the pub after.
Excellent.
And
Love
I
it.
and that was my thing I was doing for myself, and I felt like I was coming back to myself, and I was also coming back to a part of myself that I'd neglected for a really long
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
So for me, as a person, as a mum, as everything, it was amazing for me. And and then the book just started coming, and I wrote it quite quickly, I think, because you don't have any of the hang-ups the first time. Um, and I finished the draft, and then at the end of the Faber Academy, you have this thing called the Agents Day, where agents come, and you get to read your kind of chapter of your book, that you've written or that you're starting to write or on the course. And if any of the agents are kind of interested in hearing a bit more about you or about your book, then they can kind of hang around and talk to you after. And I didn't know what my expectations were around that, but anyway, we had that day, and then afterwards there were loads of agents who were really interested in Greenwich Park and who emailed me or came over, and that was really exciting. And so that was the first moment where I thought, oh, hang on, there's
Mhm.
something here. This could be a real book. So yeah, it kind of went from there, really.
Catherine, what strikes me in everything that you've been saying, and thank you for sharing, that journey, is how important it is that if you have a dream, a desire to do or be something, and if circumstances, allow that not to let that go. And I'm thrilled at the thought that, you know, that the arrival of your daughter, galvanized that notion of I'm not going to let my dreams just disappear, because I want her when she's older to know that, your dreams, you should follow them and make them, it's so inspirational. And I think, for that little one, but for people listening who, have maybe in the past thought, oh, I'd love to, but I can't, or it won't work, or, maybe it's just waiting for the right time.
Yeah, it was for me. I mean, it had to be the right time for me.
Mm.
But also something way less inspirational and something much more prosaic happens when you become a mother, which is that you lose all sense of shame. And so once you've been through labor, I mean, I won't dwell on it, but you go through your 20s sort of thinking a little bit about your personal dignity and sort of thinking, well, I don't, and you care what people think of you in your
Oh
20s.
yeah.
I think
Oh
most
you
people,
do. Oh you
when
do.
you're young, you care what people think of you. by the time I'd done all that and I'd had this baby and I'd had complete abject personal humiliation on the kind of table of labor, I was just kind of like, no, I don't care anymore. I don't, when I had my baby and she was tiny, I remember answering the door to the Amazon man with one of my boobs out. I mean, once you've done that, you know,
Yes,
people finding out that you've written a book and it didn't do very well is kind of like doesn't even register on the
doesn't, yeah, so
barometer of
whatever.
investment. So
Yeah,
I think that was also why motherhood was a good time to do it, because you just think, do you know what? You don't have time to worry about that nonsense anymore. You don't have time. And some part of it's age, part of it for me was my having my baby. It's just like, I don't have time for this nonsense. Who cares what people think of you? Just do it. You want to
just
do it.
do it.
Do it. And sometimes the difference between authors and people who aren't authors but want to be is that the authors sat down and written the book. That is actually, and I would like to caveat that by saying that I'm in a really privileged position. I had great family support. Some people are like,
Yeah,
how the hell did you write your book on your
yeah,
maternity? I was on my own, maybe I had my baby in COVID and that was a whole other challenge. Or they are just don't have family here, or their family are miles away. They don't have that support. They don't have enough money for loads of childcare. And I completely get that. And I was in a privileged position. I had my mum, she came once a week, so I could write for a whole day, and she was amazing, and she just
beautiful.
my baby. And then I had to, and then other times when we had enough money, we would pay for childcare, once a week or twice a week. So when I was in the later stages of it and my baby was a bit bigger, to start getting her used to childcare anyway, because I was still
Yeah, yeah.
work, but also so I could write. And it's not easy for everyone. Some authors have it much tougher. They get up at 5 a.m. and things like that. I've never done that. I just can't. I physically
Yeah,
can't.
I am in awe of that 5 o'clock
Yeah.
club.
I don't know how people do it, although I
No.
bet you're really productive if you're that kind of person. But yeah, my kids wake me
Mhm.
up at 6, and that's just enough for me.
Yeah, that is fine. That is fine, is it not? Yeah. So Greenwich Park, it came out in 2021. It was a Waterstones Thrill of the Month, and it's been an international bestseller. And that sense of the darkness that runs underneath the notion of privilege. You explored that beautifully. And I think in the book that we're going to talk about, the other mothers, I think there's still a sense of that there, of what looks like the perfect life of those that have, of those, in certain position in life. And from the outside, it looks all beautiful, but peel back the layers and it starts getting quite sinister and quite unpleasant.
Mm.
So if we can, um, I wondered, th- that idea of motherhood. Um, what did I write about it? Well, reluctant mothering. We'll come back to that. If we can explore different aspects of motherhood, and I must confess and say it's something that has never happened and sadly will never happen for me on a personal level. I think having been, worked with students for many, many years, I've had the privilege of having chance with other people's children, but not my own, and never going through the process that you mentioned. Yeah,
Lucky you.
yeah, but yes, there has to be some advantages to not having had children. But if we start with your main protagonist, Tash, and she's a journalist. Um, and so you haven't spoken about what you've spoken about personally. It's it's lovely doing this, and I would say, readers, or if you're listening on audiobook, having heard what Katherine said about that journalism side of her life, when you read the book, have a watch for Tash and her journalism style and focus. And yeah, whilst I would not say Katherine and Tash are synonymous, I think you've drawn on your experiences, yeah?
Oh, definitely. And being a news reporter is the most extraordinary inspiration for writing books, because you just see all sides of human life, and you also see you have privileged access to people in the very extreme moments of their life. So in court cases, after disasters, in extremis at inquests. I mean, it was actually an inquest that I attended when I was training as a journalist, which inspired the case of Sophie, because I came across a real case like that when I was training as a journalist. I attended the inquest, and it was all really murky. The evidence was really unclear, and it was kind of written off as an accidental death. And I was just sitting in the courtroom thinking, hang on, there's something more here. This person could easily have been murdered. And I talked to people afterwards, and they said, well, yeah, you know, absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence, but you can't
Yes.
prove a negative. We can't magic up evidence that isn't there. So this person had attended somebody's flat who they'd met online. They had both taken a drug, but this person had taken much more, and this person had died. And they said, well, you know, it's recreational and whatever, but nobody knew, like, the dynamics were so unclear of like how this had ended up happening. And it was just like, well, two people have taken drugs, you know, young people, silly them.
Yeah, sadly, one person, yeah.
And I just thought, well, what if it's really weird that the other person was not didn't had nowhere near as much as this one, and what, you know, it was all just, we only had his word for it. So anyway, it was fascinating. And I'm not saying that person was murdered, by the way, because I actually, in the process of researching this, I did pull the court transcripts and everything and went through it. But to me, what was interesting was not that specific story so much as the idea, excuse me, that a murder could be missed.
Yeah.
And when I spoke to coroners, pathologists, and I went through it with them, because I just couldn't let this idea go, and they all said, yeah, a murder could be missed in any number of ways. And they talked to me about all the ways in which that could be possible, which was totally fascinating. And one of them, they talked about bodies in water, which are very difficult for pathologists, especially if they've been there a while and the water's warm. And essentially, it's all really gruesome, gets quite gritty, but basically, you know, animals, fish get at the body, birds. There's also a lot of decomposition and discoloring of the skin and things like that, and that can mask lots of signs of injuries. So all of that was greatly helpful to me with my plot. So yes, so in that way, being a journalist very directly inspired this book. But of course, there was lots of other indirect inspiration for the character of Tash, because she's a journalist. I kind of wanted to show a bit about how hard it is as well, not just for reporters, but for anyone who does a job that's basically not amazingly paid. I mean, in London, everybody is expected to live this lifestyle. There's this sort of weird, and I think not even, it's wider than London. It's things like Instagram, isn't it, and Facebook, and all of this showing off that we all do on social media makes us all believe that we sort of should be able to afford X, Y, and Z, but actually it doesn't always match up to real life or to our income or to the cost of living crisis.
It's right. And what I think what always disturbs me slightly is the idea of, you know, the aspiring to be, and the sense of unless I reach whatever, you know, whatever it is, I am not, you know, I'm not fulfilled. I'm not a, you know, I'm not a person worth any acknowledgement. And I, you know, that sense of, you get that with, and it's interesting, you know, because Tash, you know, she has a job, she has, she has family, but that desiring to be other.
Yeah, I think for her, she's finding it really, she's wondering why life just feels hard, in the way that a lot of people, I think, get to that point in their life where they start paying for childcare, which is this extraordinary amount of money. And they really, maybe you haven't worried about it up to that point as much as well. And journalists get a lot of stick for lots of different reasons, some justified, some not. But one thing that journalists are not usually is actually financially greedy. They're usually in journalism for a different reason, because journalism doesn't pay very well. So if you're somebody who wants to make a lot of money and you're excessively interested in wealth, you're not really going to become a journalist, because it's not well paid. Look, some of them are egotists. They like their ego. They like their byline. They like showing off. All of that is true. And you get those people in journalism. But what you don't get is people who are greedy. Tash isn't in it for the money.
Yeah.
She wanted an interesting job. She wanted an interesting life. She's nosy. She likes stories. She likes people. She likes finding stuff out, and she doesn't like injustice. She doesn't like when things aren't fair. And that's what actually the average journalist is like. And they're not all perfect and they get it wrong. But that is kind of the type of person that you get in journalism. And those people are usually smart if they're good at journalism because it's hard. And they're usually quite funny and they've usually got some really good stories down the pub, especially compared to the lawyers and the doctors and all the other people in their friendship group. That's the kind of person journalists are. So I tried to be true to that with Tash, but she's not perfect. And one thing, but the other thing is that in your 20s, that's all fine. Not having much money is fine. But suddenly you have a child and you suddenly feel this great responsibility. You think, I want to give them a really good life. I want them to have the best life. And the way that we live in our society is, and Instagram is, it's
Yeah,
hard
yeah,
not to measure it sometimes by material things because
mm,
everything is so visual, you
yeah,
know, or
yeah,
online life is very curated and it's about these beautiful visuals of other people enjoying these amazing things. And the things that get fed to you if you're a mother are amazing visuals of people enjoying perfect lives with their children. And I still get them all the time. And I find it totally fascinating, the kind of psychological impact that
mm,
and for Tash, she sees it in her local community too, because London is this place where cheek by jowl you have cheap house shares that are crumbling and awful, and landlords who trap awful council tenants in these terrible flats with mold. And then you have these
mhm,
stunning houses that cost £5 million. And, you know, Tash is right up against the type of mothers, the type of lifestyle that she would love to give her son and that she would love to have because it would be so much easier and be more beautiful than her life. Just more beautiful, just more gorgeous, but she can't attain it.
yeah,
And
yeah,
that's hard for her and she can't stop. It's a bit addictive, you know, looking into and being interested in other people's lives and scrolling Rightmove. So that's the kind of person she is. And that's sort of her fatal flaw, I guess, if you believe in the idea of this fatal flaw that kind of leads her into big trouble.
yeah. And how? So the other mothers that we've mentioned, I just wondered because there's a substantial number of characters uh, that you bring into the book, and before you began the writing, did you assemble your characters, or did some of them pop up along the way, and and did you think you have to be in this? I'll bring you in.
So you meet lots of different other kinds of other mothers when
Mhm.
you're a mother, and all those interactions are totally fascinating to me. It's funny, some people hate the school gates and all those interactions, but
Yeah.
think I mean, I really love talking to other mums. I love that motherhood is a bit of a leveler between, and you end up talking to different types of women that you might not chat to so easily because your kids just start playing together. I love the kind of mad spontaneity of all that and how it kind of brings people together. So I really love that, and I just find people really interesting. So it's not that I'm constantly kind of combing the mothers at my school playgroup for character details, but I mean, you do draw certain vectors of funny little things that people do and say and little characteristics that people have. So I think I had sort of assembled the kind of three key other mothers,
Yeah.
Nicole, Claire, and Laura, in my mind. And Laura's the kind of mum who kind of just draws you straight in and come over for spaghetti bolognese and play dates, and is just totally casual about the fact that she's got this gorgeous house full of amazing toys and just come in and I'll make you a glass of champagne and we'll do this and this and this, and it's that kind of wow, that charisma and energy and welcomingness. And then Claire's the kind of the softer, more zen kind of mother that I've encountered in the kind of more bougie areas of Islington, who kind of goes to a lot of yoga classes and always carries a water bottle and talks a bit like this and always has a really nice linen outfit on. And then, but also really nice and lovely. But sometimes you wonder, like, what else is there though? Like if I pull back that linen curtain, like
Yeah, yeah,
what's going on in there? And then Nicole is the woman who I think exists in a lot of situations where you have a pre-existing clique or group and the new person comes into it. There's always one, they don't like it, you know, and
yeah,
they go into slightly territorial
yeah.
lioness. And that's Nicole. And she's one of those women that's also slightly terrifying. And I quite like her interactions with Tash because I think Tash is really scared of Nicole, and finds her a little bit hostile and isn't quite sure, always feels a bit wrong-footed around her, which I also find very fun. So yeah, I had the three in my head for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah. Um, I have to say, myself, that sense of, yeah, I would I would love to be invited round. I wouldn't feel that I, fitted in any way, but just to have a taste of those oh, I don't know, moments of, wow, look, and this food is amazing. I could never cook anything like this. It wouldn't look like this,
Yeah.
And if I was wearing the linen suit, it would be so crumpled. It would just be
Yeah, exactly. Well,
ridiculous,
that's Tash, she can't do it. When
Mhm.
she goes out, she looks wrong in all the leggings and all the like things that they wear. Um, but um, but she's intrigued by it and fascinated by it, and because she's a journalist, she almost slightly investigates them even before she's investigating.
Before there's
So
before the
she's looking and she's thinking, oh, why is this house looking so clean and tidy when mine is cut? Oh, it's because you have this like quiet nanny who's going around and like tidying everything. Oh, and you've got a flower delivery service that conveniently gives you a fresh bouquet every week. And oh, you've got these recipe boxes where all the ingredients are measured out for you. And that's how you cook all these amazing healthy meals because it takes 2 seconds because it's all done. And you're not trudging to the supermarket like I am
yeah,
and carrying 3 heavy bags up a flight of stairs. So it's just a totally different experience of motherhood to what she's experiencing. And no wonder they all look so relaxed and she feels
and
stressed and
she's yeah.
wrung out all the time.
Although I did enjoy what you said about motherhood being a leveler
Hmm.
in the sense of certain experiences.
It can be, it can
Yeah.
be, and it levels you up and down as well. Your kids don't discriminate who they play with, and so you end up being pulled into different people's kind of houses for coffee while the kids play, um and you start to, and especially in an area as diverse as where I live, there's a lot of different people doing it different ways, and different faiths and cultural backgrounds, as well as different people, but also people in very different tax bands from each other,
Yeah.
and that is very interesting to me. And so what I loved about writing The Other Mothers was also having the character of of Sal, who is this working class character who's a childminder. And I grew up with childminders like Sal, who were local women who lived in council flats, who did childminding, and who were amazing and warm. And
Yeah.
yeah, their houses didn't look like anything you see on Instagram, but they cooked amazing food, proper
Yeah.
whole food. They took us out to the park. We always had a raincoat on if it was raining. They did mothering properly, like they did it,
Yes.
and they were warm and they
Yes.
were
Yeah.
loving. And yeah, the telly was on quite a lot, but and they were probably giving us probably a bit too many biscuits, but it was loving. And it was, my
Yeah.
parents knew that that was the right thing to expose me to, and those women were so loving and no nonsense as well. And they didn't take any rubbish from like the posy middle class mothers of the area. So um, I like having Sal around because she's a good corrective to
Yeah.
all that sort of stuff.
And I appreciated that the again the layering or the diversity of caring, doing the mothering, as you say, not necessarily being the person who's given birth, because mothering can take lots of different forms.
Oh, for
And
sure.
and I just thought as well, to have a focus in a psychological thriller. Okay, women and what's happening is one thing, but that bringing motherhood front and center, despite some of the unsavory aspects, and I don't mean of the mothering, but of the characters. So it's really important. I think it's one of those aspects of life that can so easily be, pushed aside. That it's in the hierarchy of
Oh,
importance.
it's never given any esteem at all. It's treated like it's not given any kind of status, it's not given any
Hmm.
kind of remuneration, any kind of recognition.
Hmm.
you know, the whole of COVID, I, like probably a lot of mothers and also just people with children in their family, anyone who's interested in kids, was just tearing their hair out. The complete lack of recognition of mothers
Yeah.
and mothering. And
Yeah.
it was just like, well, you know, there's a pandemic, so what's going to happen is all the women are going to stay at home and all the men are going to go out to work, and you just have to stay at home with your children. You're not allowed to see anyone. It was like all these restrictions were placed on the people who didn't work in certain industries. And basically, if you were an essential worker, then you had to work and you had no choice about it. If you had children, and the people who, you know, take a break or on maternity leave or at home temporarily or otherwise to look after children, tend to be women.
Yes.
Way more restrictions were placed on your freedom of movement, your freedom of association, everything, than other people. It was a hugely unequal.
Mm.
And none of that came up in the debate. There was no proper discussion, as we're now seeing the terrible effects of the effect of it all on
Yeah.
children. And it was all totally ridiculous. So yes, it was a great example of where motherhood is just cast aside, even though it's this huge thing. And it's a huge thing not just for people who are kind of fluffy kind of people who just, oh, all I wanted to do was be a mummy. No, it's about it. Mothering it's a huge societal
Yeah.
responsibility which
Yeah.
spreads across, as you mentioned, not even just people who give birth, but lots of other people too, the fathers, the grandmothers, the aunts. You know, we rely so much on, you know, both of our sisters have no children, and they are like surrogate parents to our kids, and
Yeah.
thank that, because they're incredible and they bring this amazing new energy. And also our grandparents do so much, and it really is a shared job. And it's just treated like it's not like it's nothing, I think, because we just have the wrong people in charge, but that's a whole other debate. But it's really important that you raise this idea about the mothering is not all just done by the mothers, because of course there's the character of Sophie, and she's not a mother, she's a nanny. And I think the way in which she gets pushed aside for not being the real mother, and but yet she's expected to do all of the things that the mother does, and in fact she's at times doing a lot more than Claire is doing, is really an interesting dynamic to me, because I think that the dynamics of having somebody in your house who is a nanny, who's looking after your children, who is basically a surrogate you for a while,
Yeah.
work, is a really, really interesting one. And I've always found it fascinating. And how do you manage that relationship correctly? And how do you get the balance right? And how does it not become an uncomfortable relationship? Because isn't it just an inherently uncomfortable thing? And actually, it's not. It can be a wonderful thing, I know, and a really positive thing. But there are wrinkles. You can't get away from
But
that.
you cut. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
You know, it's just so intensely personal.
A-
Um,
And and sadly, for Sophie, because I think we're okay to say that Sophie is the victim.
yeah, we know
That
that from the beginning.
yeah, that Tash does this looking into. But what I thought was lovely, really, that you did was that dual narration, those dual voices. So
Yeah.
Tash, of course, but also that in the time leading up to Sophie's demise, we hear from her as well. And I wondered why your choice for doing that. Why give us, not just reporting on here's a victim, but that we hear from that victim.
Yeah. I think that I thought a lot about it, and it's something that I didn't do in Greenwich Park. You never hear from Rachel in
Yeah.
Greenwich, and she and it was in, and it that to me was of a piece with the story, because Rachel never had a voice. You know, that was actually the driving factor of the whole book. She'd been denied her voice, she'd been denied her day to talk, and so that had driven her to the action in the book. So it made sense to me with Rachel. With Sophie, though, I felt like I wanted her voice. I wanted her to speak. I wanted to know what her life was like living in that house as the nanny, looking after those kids, but being treated like a kind of second-class citizen. And, you know, the dynamic, I think, when she becomes friends with the other mothers, and she realizes that if they thought she was a nanny, they probably wouldn't really be bothered about going for coffee with her, but because they think they make the mistake of thinking she's a mother. This is just a very small spoiler, it's not really, but this is just one encounter she has. They think she's a mother and they say, oh, come along, and she realizes that she kind of has to stick with that, because otherwise she's, you know, a nanny is a different category in their brain.
Oh yeah,
So,
that hierarchy of
and there's
that
there are all
society.
these kind of unacknowledged hierarchies around, and all of them are interesting to me. So yeah, I think that was another thing that I was really keen to explore the world through her eyes. It was tricky though because she's young, so I had to try and write from a young person's point of view, and I realized that I'm actually like, you know, I had to make sure that my language was correct and my, you know, I wasn't, yeah, talking about things that were totally out of date, which I do think it happens in books, and it can be really cringy when there's like a young person character, but they're basically the author's voice and the author's not a young person. So yeah, I was really had to try quite hard with that.
So when you were saying at the start of our conversation about you couldn't write historical, you know, because it's too hard and to get on all, but writing historical, you know, that idea of a voice from back in the past and how people spoke then, but that would be fixed as opposed to, okay, if I have a young person now, where is the language now? You know, you can look back at what language was and it's fixed, and that's whereas this, but yeah. So, Tash is, you know, Tash is this inquisitive person, and because of it, sadly, it gets her into hot water as she looks into what actually happened to Sophie. We mustn't give anything away of you know how things go, but I just wondered Tash's bravery, that inquisitive thing, the wanting to push things. Were you that kind of journalist? It sounds that you were.
I was, and I never wanted to be a political journalist because I never really liked the idea of cozying up to people to try and get stories out of them. I liked being on the sidelines and digging around and finding documents and asking annoying questions. That was the sort of journalist that I was. I mean, it's a bit of a privilege to get to be that kind of journalist. It's not something that happens overnight. You have to start on the small stuff. And so if you look at my I'm so sorry, I'm sneezing.
Bless you.
I'm sorry. If you look back at my bylines, not all of it has been, you know, great investigative journalism or anything, but if you when you start, you get in the training that I did anyway, you get to be a small cog on a bigger story usually to try and learn the ropes a bit. Not much is expected of you, but you're kind of sent along as an extra pair of hands. So there might have been a murder and you're trying to find out more about the people involved and what happened and what led up to it. So you're going around with a more experienced journalist, and I'll say, okay, you knock those doors, I'll do these doors, and then we'll go and try and talk to the family, or we'll go and try and talk to this neighbor, and then we'll split up and come back together later, and then go down to the scene and see if people have written any tributes that give us any clues, and all of these sorts of, you know, the real nuts and bolts of crime reporting. And then it's later in your career that you start getting onto the bigger stuff. And the kind of more macro, you know, the really big stories that are more complex. But all of it is fascinating and useful and great training and great fodder for stories, you know, and especially when you're doing something, I mean, it's like the basic thing of knocking doors when you're a young journalist. Yeah. Kind of a bit like being a young police officer on the beat. You start with the kind of door knocking-y kind of stuff. And, you know, sometimes you knock on someone's door and they answer it totally naked. Or another time you knock on someone's door and they invite you in and show you 20 photo albums and you can't leave because they just want company and want someone to have a cup of tea with. But other times you get literally chased down the garden path by someone with a great big dog. So, you know, it's just random and wonderful in that way because you just experience all of this incredible diversity of how people are, and some of those stories that I've worked on have been absolutely incredible. And you know, people get it, like I say, journalists get a bad press, but I remember times when I was investigating I was doing a background on a case where there had been a lot of hate crime against gay people in a community in Derbyshire by a kind of really extreme Islamic group. and I knocked on the door of this gay couple who were absolutely living in fear, and they were just absolutely delighted to tell their story to me, even though they were worried to do so. But we sat down, and that felt really important, and that was just from, you know, a door knock, and actually it turned into this really amazing piece as to what it was like living in this community where, you know, in the UK, these people who you didn't feel safe just being who they were. So it was yeah, sorry, I'm going off on a tangent, but anyway, it there were so many amazing experiences that inspired my.
But what strikes me though, again, the way you're talking about this, you know, and whilst we should say as well that Tash might be an unreliable narrator, we need to bring that in, but Tash is a journalist, and I can hear you in her, the things that, you know, the things that matter to you. I am aware of the time, and I you know, we could be doing this. So I love the conversation, but I don't want to keep you because you know, life has its other responsibilities as well. So I wonder if we could close. I sometimes like to ask this question of, you know, so the new book's out, people are really warming to it. If you could speak to us about, take an aspect, what is it that you are proudest of about what you've achieved with the other mothers?
I think the thing I'm proudest of is having people say to me, it's it's this extraordinary illustration of the psychological pressure of being a parent of a young child through Tasha's eyes, and that so many different people have been able to relate to her experience in that way.
Mm-hmm.
Even though she's quite a specific sort of character, and obviously not everybody discovers a murder in their local neighborhood
Yeah,
and starts
hopefully not.
investigating it.
Yeah, yeah.
But they say the context and the atmosphere and the world that she exhibits is very real to them because they've lived it, and they have lived those weird encounters at the school gates and the playground gates, and dropping your child off, and the horror of dropping your child off when they scream, and making ends meet and feeling like you should be able to afford a better flat than what you've got. It feels to me that her voice has connected with people.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing that I'm proudest of. And also, but really the thing, which is what you want to hear, is that people say, I was up all night with it. I couldn't put it down. I had to know what the story was. I had to know what the mystery was. And really, that's what I'm always setting out to achieve. You know, as much as my books, I would like to think they talk about things that are bigger than just, you know, just being a crime story, but
Yes.
they're supposed to be thrillers, they're supposed to be addictive, they're supposed to be books you can't put down and that you're up all night with, because that's what I want in a book. I want a book that's immersive, it just takes me away and doesn't put me down until it's finished. And and people are saying that's the case with the other mothers, as it was with Greenwich Park, and that they're really loving it for that reason, and that's what I want to hear. That's like a big tick in my box.
That is so beautiful. Katherine, for all that we've shared in our conversation today, I think coming back to the notion of, you know, you wanted to tell stories from the start, yeah? And
Yeah.
here you are now, you know, establishing yourself as a storyteller to watch for. Even if sometimes the read can be a little bit uncomfortable, I think if you're spotting yourself in some of the characters, but it's just, you know, in the times we live in, to provide people with that kind of book that says, regardless of what's going on, sit yourself down, dive into these pages, and you will be there on that ride until the end, at time away, at time for self. Because I think that was something else that you spoke about, that you were able to do with the Faber writing, you know, a time for me. You know, and again, I'm thinking back to this notion of mothering and how very often, you know, it's everybody else's needs and then mine.
Absolutely.
You know, and I think somebody like yourself providing stories, you know, whether we read them or we listen to them, or that says this is my time, you know. Whether I do it when the kids have gone to school, I take some time. Whether, you know, it's the end of the day, I can maybe relax in the bath with a good book. So thank you, Katherine, for doing that. So good.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, that's what I would definitely hope for. So I hope that's the case. And thank you for having me. It's been so much fun chatting.
An absolute pleasure. Wish you all the very best with the other mothers, as in the book, and not the other mothers. And yeah, yeah.
I probably
And
need luck with both.
and I hope we get a chance to chat again soon. May this just be the start of an ongoing conversation.
Yes, absolutely. See you soon.
See you soon. Bye.